Good morning. Welcome. Good to be with you this morning as we welcome our Bishop, José McLoughlin. We're just going to give a couple of minutes before we begin, because you know how it goes here at Trinity Church. 9:30 is really 9:40. You would think we're.
Well, I was just saying,
9:30 is really 10 there.
I think I told the story when I was a priest in Miami. That whenever we had weddings, we intentionally couples announced the wedding a half hour before it's actually. So the invitation would say the wedding is 6 o'clock and 6:30. Because we all knew by the time 6:30 rolled around, the majority of people would be there. But it said 6, they wouldn't show up at 6. So we do 6 with a 6:30 start time.
Just as a review, so to say, for all of you who've recently been through, or maybe last year through the Exploring the Episcopal Experience class, we have 3 dioceses here in the state of North Carolina. We are the Western Diocese. The best. Yes, although I spent almost, yes, it's almost just as long here as.
It wasn't the best until you left.
Then the Diocese of Newark, which is in the center of Piedmont, what we call Piedmont area of the state, and does encompass most of the big cities of the state, Raleigh, Charlotte, Winston-Salem, and then the Diocese of East Carolina, which does encompass Greenville and Fayetteville and Wilmington down to the coast. So we are the Diocese of Western North Carolina, and we welcome Bishop José to be with us. Please greet him. Let us greet him with a clap. So thank you.
Well, I'd like to brag that the Bishop of East Carolina, Rob Sterving, has announced his retirement.
Oh, boy.
So in the not too distant future, I will be the senior bishop of North Carolina. Thank you very much. And with that comes absolutely nothing.
If the First Trinity and the East called you and asked about our record, you would not recommend it for anything.
Yeah, the joke is when you know, I have priests in this diocese who are discerning calls to other dioceses and their bishop calls, and I don't want to lose the priest. I jokingly say they to the effect of good priest, solid team player. The financial improprieties, I think we could probably overlook. It's a delight to be with you all. May the 4th be with you for all who celebrate. So at any point today, at any time, you'll turn on your television and you'll see a Star Wars movie playing all day. And as a person who was 8 years old when I saw the first Wars in the movie theater and was hooked ever since, it is a holy day. Although my schedule will not allow me much TV time today, but nonetheless, I'd say that because it's already prevalent around. Somebody already said, may the 4th be with you. Anyway, so it's good to be with you all for the annual visit. And as I like to do on all my visitations, every Sunday around this diocese, is to not do a programmed or formatted sort of presentation, but to really allow for a forum for conversation, to answer any questions that you all have, anything you want to share. Just note that all complaints must be submitted in writing. So my apology. Anything you want to talk about, because I've learned over the years that part of the challenge of being a bishop, well, there's several, but I don't get to preach every Sunday at the same church. So those days when I was in parish where I could say like, and I know Scott does it, Amy probably do, it's like, you can preach a series of Sundays, right? And you know, this gospel today is going to be over a series. I don't have that ability, so I have to find those moments. And likewise, I'm preaching, right? So all you're hearing is me talk. And so I felt very strongly when I became bishop that I needed to provide opportunities for parishioners to ask me questions directly and to be able to talk about what you want to talk about, not necessarily what I think you want to talk about. So that's sort of how I approach this. So take any questions. I always got a topic ready. I've never had to use it. but the topic has usually been the Western economy's impact in third world nations. I have a PowerPoint slide, so should we get bogged down, we can go there. So, anyway, with that, who has a question or a comment, or hopefully not a complaint?
Did we lose any parishes because of the lead?
So,
Can you
Yeah.
repeat that, because you want?
oh, sorry. Did we lose any parishes during the lean? So, no, but, we had 26 churches that had all stages of damage. You know, flooding to trees down to, you know, everything in between, wind combined, a lot of trees. As many of you know, some of you too well, about trees, but, two churches remain, unoccupiable. You know, one is, of course, the cathedral, which is really on a league of its own. It's a really catastrophic damage. And I think it doesn't take much when you've gone down to the village still, and see, the impact, and that's gonna be a long haul, so in that case, you know, the water went up to the altar in the cathedral, it took everything inside its contents and literally lifted it up like vegetables in a bowl of soup. And when everything settled, everything just kind of landed, so pews and the kneelers and, so the water went halfway up in the parish hall. It went all the way to the ceiling in the offices. Everything got washed away. The office was a total loss. Everything was torn down to the studs. Their computers, books, the clergy's degrees, all their personal effects, everything's gone. So we lost pretty much everything there. And so that's been a long road, and we continue to work there. And there's a team together, which includes, I've appointed the candidate, we're in there to be part of that committee. We're now in the process of talking to architects to talk about, now's the opportunity before we just kind of rush in. Let's look about what we want to do. And so there's a lot of talk about, we've talked about for years in the cathedral, expanding the kitchen so that we can provide meals to the community and other things. So now we're going to take a step back and kind of look at what we want to change to really vision the next step in ministry for the cathedral. And then, of course, transfiguration, that chimney rock. And actually some of our brick kill in that. So that's been a tough one because they're sort of like the community, just like the cathedral, kind of in the diaspora. You know, they don't have a place to go to because they can't get to it. In those first few weeks, when we were trying to assess the damage, we ended up we had insurance adjusters from church insurance and others. It took a group of 5 people. They had to walk and hike 2.5 miles each direction to get to the church. We had to have drones go up to try to get aerials. We couldn't see everything. Had helicopters who agreed to fly over. An Episcopalian who lives in East Tennessee, who I know has a helicopter, and he flew over. And he took pictures of various churches for us so that we could get a better sense of what we were dealing with. And so a lot of flooding, a lot of damage, and of course the community has been wiped out. So the access there, so right now in that community, they're worshiping at St. Paul's, Edneyville. So a few months back, I think we did it in October, December, we did a service where I did a service at St. James, and we had all the churches along that 64 corridor, like the Pia, Santa Maria, St. Paul's, Edneyville, St. James, others, and we all worshiped Transfiguration. We did a big service that I presided over and preached to kind of recognize sort of that community in that area got hit hard. The cathedral is now worshiping in St. George's in West Asheville, and that's worked out. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a special thanks to Scott, to all of you for, I think Scott was one of the first phone calls to say the cathedral is welcome here. And the fact that they were able to come worship here, and we did an ordination here, and so I'm truly grateful for that. So we invested some money in getting St. George's at a place where they could worship there. So it's ongoing, and so what we've done is we've been working with every church that's had damage. Working with them to file insurance. If there's been a gap in insurance or that they are costs that they didn't prepare for, we've done 2 things. One, we've provided funds for those churches in a series of grants. And then I filed without even really talking to any of the clergy, I pretty much filed a waiver request with church pension for all 26 churches and the diocesan office, the staff who are ordained like myself, and asked for a 4-month waiver of pension payments. So they approved, and so essentially church pension is paying the pension of all the clergy in those 26 churches for 4 months. So the pension payment that the church would normally pay could go to then help in their recovery efforts and rebuilding. So we've worked hard to make sure that no church has gotten into a financial fit. So we continue to work, and I hope at some point, I don't know if you'll invite my deputy of disaster relief, Kelsey, to tell you all. We had a video, I don't know if you've all seen it, we put out. If you're on our mailing list, we talk about what we're doing now in response. We have a disaster recovery and relief team, rebuilding team, we call it DIRT for short. And we have a great team assembled, and they're doing phenomenal work in different communities to rebuild and to help communities. So I would ask you, somebody needs.
No, I want to just say one word on this, if you don't mind.
Please.
I don't want to take up your time here, but I know that everybody there is probably interested about Trinity Church. And just so you know, many of you know, we lost almost all of our trees, except for some of the big ones, thank God. We experienced to the building almost no damage except old leaks reappeared. So if you go into the tower room of the church, you'll see the visibility of the damage that came back through Helene. We've submitted to FEMA for repairs. The first step of that is getting a loan through the Small Business Administration. So we did get a loan. We were approved for a loan through the Small Business Administration, and we've gotten a loan. And now whatever might or may not happen through FEMA is a longer process, but we're committed to fixing the bell tower leaks and roof with those funds. And that's it all needs to be spent in the next 4 or 5 months. So if you see some construction going on in the church, that's what it's about. Other than that, we did not experience the type of damage to the building that many of our friends and colleagues did.
Thanks for that. So I think we're in a good place going forward in our recovery efforts. I hope you go to diocesan, there's a full website, tells you all the things we're doing, all the places we're involved, all our partners. We're dedicating all our resources in that direction. And we have TAL Ministry, which is where we bring high school kids to work in communities. That TAL Ministry this summer is all going to be working to rebuild communities in Henderson County. So we're putting all our resources into rebuilding, and who we're rebuilding and who we're focusing on are people who do not have the resources to rebuild. And those who, let's just be frank, are pretty much targets right now. They don't have the resources. So we're stepping in to make sure that their homes are rebuilt when others will not. So you can go to our website, you can see all that. There was a video that we put together, and it's a video where I narrate all the things we're doing and how we're responding. And so if you want to volunteer, if you want to do things, all the information is there, you can look up. But I think one of the things that helps is that Western North Carolina, our strength has always been that, one, this is like not-for-profit central. There's so many organizations that are already involved in food scarcity and housing and all. So for those first weeks, we were just pumping money, over 50 grand, just to organizations that already had the infrastructure. And so that's been a big blessing, because that's the structure that we're working in to make sure we're not being repetitive or doubling resources. And then the other thing is the people in Western North Carolina are beyond generous. Generosity has just been amazing. So not only in Western North Carolina, but also throughout the entire church and the entire country. And I'm still writing thank you notes. Every week I take a pile and I handwrite a thank you note. Bishops, dioceses, parishes, all over the country, all over the world, because of the extreme generosity. So it's going to be years ahead. Make no mistake about it. I don't know when we'll be back in the cathedral again. We did go in the cathedral, and actually I probably going to mention it in my sermon, but so there's path, but it's a long one. It's a long one.
Has construction even started on the cathedral?
No, construction has not started on the cathedral. We're not there yet. I mean, if you go in there, we have a fence around, but, inside it's. I mean, we did a lot of remediation. That took a long time. I mean, they were pumping water out of the cathedral for 11 days. Just to give you an indication how much water. And of course, a building that old and all that, you know, there's a lot you start to discover when it has that kind of damage. And we were very blessed because the Cecils have been very generous, the Cecils / Vanderbilts who've been part of our community from the beginning. And, you know, who built the cathedral, have been wonderful. So when, a few days after the storm, when I called, Jack and Bill Cecil, they were wonderful and they sent teams from the Biltmore. And they came and took all our stuff, that we salvaged. They took documents, blueprints and other things we found. Jack Cecil, and his team, made copies of all the blueprints and stuff so we could give insurance. And then the Biltmore, Bill Cecil and his team took all our pews, took everything, and they've been working with us to help restore. And one of the folks there is part of our team to give us guidance as we look at rebuilding and how we approach it. So many folks reached out, but even they were great. They sent trucks immediately, were picking stuff up for us and taking it to the estate. And so we've been very blessed with a lot of generosity. So right now, we're at the stage of sort of saying, what do we envision ourselves at this cathedral? And now's the time to say, do we want to modify building structures? Where do we want to augment, like the kitchen is a good example. So
What happened to those beautiful?
the floors are still there. They look rough. I mean, there's gonna be some work done. When you go behind there, if you're familiar with the cathedral, behind the altar, there was that little sort of like turret looking thing and you walk around it. The water was up to here. And so all that area back there where the choir and some of the stuff was kept, you know, was impacted. And in some of those areas, the floors have all been pulled now. Because it was so bad, and some of the flooding underneath and some of the access. So in a lot of places, you have wood panels right now that are just simply covering. But the main sanctuary worship space held pretty well as far as that floor. Needs work, but it held surprisingly well.
Other questions?
Are things at Lake Logan?
Things are great. I mean, they got damaged too, and so did Valley Crucis.
Lake Logan.
Sorry, Lake Logan, is the question. They're doing well. I mean, we also gave money to, Lake Logan and Valley Crucis for lost revenue and to help with. And helping them in the process of getting assistance and filing insurance. Valley Crucis became a hub for people to get showers because they're high up. And so the community below, including the school, was wiped out. And so they became a place where people were getting showers, food, place to stay. And so they became a place, a rallying place. And a wonderful thing that I'm so proud of, and talk about how we work together and sort of how we find hope in the midst of everything, is we entered into an agreement with Valley Crucis School. And so we took the entire Valley Crucis School and housed them for their this last semester of school for this year, finishing out the year. So we have the entire elementary school at Valley Crucis using between the conference center and the church. And so we had clergy conference, we had a bunch of elementary school kids going between classes. So that was one way we helped as they're finishing the new school so they can move in for next year. And then Lake Logan got a lot of damage in the field, and fortunately it didn't hurt, you know, any of the cabins or anything, but that lake, I mean, the river, you saw everything that collapsed in, and if you've been out there, you saw that it's now really wide. And one part of it is so close to our maintenance shed, it's kind of scary that it's almost a drop off. And so the lake, a lot of stuff was dredged up. There's a sandbar out there now. If you want to walk on water, you can. And actually, it's going to serve a purpose because it's created a natural area for us to create the swim area again at the lake for camp, which actually worked out. And truth be told, we had talked about widening or how to create an area along that field where we could have some picnic areas and stuff facing riverfront, but we had a lot of trees and everything. So what we've been saying at Lake Logan is that it was the violent execution of a very well thought out plan. It's now we have that front, but we'll be ready for Cold Mountain Music Festival. We We've redone the wiring and electrical for the band stage, we've done the field, we've worked it out. And so we'll be ready to go for Cold Music Festival at the end of May, but they're doing well. Yes,
Just thinking about the Halloween and then the fires that were kind of threatening Canoga and like, just kind of how in your way with your faith and how are like you making sense of guiding the people through climate change and everything that comes with that? I'm curious to hear your.
Try to keep it to 5 minutes.
so how am I making sense of all this with the fires, natural disasters,
What are your
faith? Well, I will tell you, it's not faith related, but a sense of humor really helps. And I mean that, I mean, taking breaks to just recognize that there are still things to be hopeful about, there's still things to be enjoyed, and there's still, I've learned that because I've been a bishop during a pandemic, natural disasters, very divisive political elections. I mean, it seems like I jumped from one anxiety or one crisis to another. And so, like those quarantine videos were a response of trying to find some joy in the midst of all this, right? And so I think first and foremost is having a good sense of humor and just not to the point of being flippant about it, but a sense of humor just sort of saying, I can't live constantly in despair. The second is just relying on the fact that I don't have the answers, but what I do have is the ability to mobilize and the ability to respond. And to me, that's how faith works. I've been at Ignatian for a long time. My style of prayer is Ignatian. It's a very active. And so Ignatians believe that prayer is through action. So what we do, how we live in the smallest of moments, in everyday moment, is that expression of faith and how we have that relationship with God. So partly because I was a first responder for so many years, I tend to not panic in crisis. I don't get overwhelmed by conflict or by, so there's a natural built-in of calmness in the midst of chaos, and I'm good at organizing chaos and crisis. And then just a realization that as the bishop, I have the ability to mobilize and to engage and to get resources. And so I think that's how I feel like my faith can play out. It's not only to say, okay, we have to pray and care for those people, but we have to then act on our faith. Jesus always went away to pray, but it always followed up with what? Him going and doing. And so that's the part where I lean into. And it's not that I believe that my good works are going to somehow get me in, front of the line. It's just based on the fact that if I truly believe what I believe, then it requires action. And it can be small to the extent of simply saying, there's a family right in front of you that needs a home, we're going to get them a home. To the larger of sort of saying, the area of Spruce Pine, Burnsville has been traumatically hit. We're going to focus a camp there. We're going to start rebuilding. You see what I'm saying? And so, and that's the part. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a lot of what I do is engage leaders and others to say, we got things we got to do. And you have a requirement, an obligation in your position to do that as well. And if you truly lean into your faith, it would mean that you in your life need to figure out a solution. So I've been involved in multiple conversations between the governor's office, the attorney general's office, folks in our legislature. Although 10 years in, I cannot get any of the senators from North Carolina to respond to anything. Yeah, and I am making that statement. Everybody else has been willing to engage. And so I organized an effort with North Carolina Council on Churches and out of Raleigh and said, we need to have a meeting with all the leaders of North Carolina, all the religious leaders. And we did. And we got together and I said, we have to speak out about this issue of immigration and how we're going to respond in this state. And so we had a meeting, bishops, AME, Baptists, the Quakers, Episcopal, Catholic. And I then suggested that we write a letter and demand a meeting with the North Carolina Sheriff's Association. Because as a former deputy sheriff, the sheriffs have all the power and authority in counties when it comes to what they enforce and whether they're going to be a part of what the federal government's doing. And so I drafted a letter that was signed by all of them. And in 2 weeks, they've actually agreed to a meeting with us in Raleigh to talk about how we're asking the sheriff to remember that they have to love their neighbor first. And how do you do that? So that's how you do it, right? And so for me, it's about taking the position and the ability that I have, leaning in my faith and saying, Jesus always took action. And no disrespect, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but thoughts and prayers only go so far. And I've called out more than my share of leaders in the state about thoughts and prayers. Thank you, but what comes next? And I think that's what we do, and I think that's how faith is lived and exhibited. We have to act on it, right? So you can quote scripture to me all you want. You can say chapter and verse, but if you don't live it, I'm not interested. Want to be more blunt, Peter?
Thank you.
Yeah. And
Story of, we have a neighbor who runs Bridge and Tunnel Coffee. And, he had said to Ed, if I could get the money, I have brick and mortar up at AV Tech where they're organizing all emergency workers. I could feed them and provide hot coffee, but I don't have the money. Ed called the bishop's office and they were up and running within what, a day? Yeah.
and that Ed in the parking lot, gave him a check. We did literally meet in the parking lot here, gave him a check. Scott,
Just to maybe change gears a little bit, we have a new presiding bishop.
we do?
Yes. So
I'm at a loss, I don't have my names.
the ministry is about, and anything that's you think would be interesting.
Yes, we do, Sean Rowe. I had the privilege of being on the nominating committee. When I was nominated for presiding bishop. And I did reflect on it and then joyfully said no. But no deed goes unpunished because
Some people say that about the bishop, but that's okay.
that's true. Yes, that's true, Scott, you know that. So within days of deciding I wasn't gonna run, the presiding bishop called me home and said, I'd like you to serve on the nominating committee. I was like, oh, I should have ran. These just pretended like I was. So I was on that committee and then also in the House of Bishops. I am the dispatch of business. I am one of 5 bishops that sets the agenda and all the business for the House of Bishops. And when we meet, we set the agenda. And then in convention, we control and run the legislative session. And so the dispatch of business is the one that also oversees and prepares and organizes and conducts the election. So I had it from the very beginning to the very end when we were sitting in a room counting votes going, we might want to call Michael Curry up here and tell him that this is the first ballot. Because we were all shocked. And I say that because of the fact that in the Episcopal Church, while we did surveys as a committee, we had stuff all over the country and we met all over the country and we listened to people. The reality is that bishops vote. The laity don't vote, priests don't vote. We get sequestered, they scramble Wi-Fi, we have to turn off all our materials, they black out windows, we can't leave the property, we're locked in the cathedral until we're done. No smoke, no white smoke. And so quite frankly, me personally, I was saying to some of our folks, like say, this is gonna be a while. This is gonna be a while. Because just so you know also, in the House of Bishops, people don't politic. People don't say vote for me. It's not like that. And so we had really solid candidates. And so when first ballot was a shock, but then in hindsight it wasn't. And I'll tell you why. And the reason is, while people in the church said, we had everything from why can't Michael Curry keep doing it? To, you know, why now can't he just stay, et cetera, et cetera. The bishops recognized, and have for some years, me especially, that the structure of the Episcopal Church, the governance of the Episcopal Church just isn't working. And I get really frustrated with bureaucracy. I get really frustrated with systems that just perpetuate systems. Sean Rowe is a systems person. He knows how to go and dismantle systems and to rethink and reimagine. He does a lot of teaching. He did one for my clergy here. I invited him years ago. To do an adaptive leadership, which is something that I subscribe to, which is essentially that there's always a little chaos in the system, which is good. As long as it doesn't get out of control, but you use that as ways and means of propelling change. And so the bishops sent a very clear message that it's time to move in a different direction. Catherine Jefferts Schori was the right bishop at the right time. In the midst of being kicked to the kids' table and all these threats, she stood firm and said, we have a place. And amidst the teaching and the struggle about same-sex marriage and ordaining same-sex folks, etc., she stood strong, kept us there. After that trauma, then comes Michael Curry to say, okay, we've been through things. It's about Jesus. It's about Jesus. Did I tell you it's about Jesus? Did I tell you about love? It's about Jesus and Jesus' love. Let's go back to the basics. Let's remind ourselves what Jesus taught us. Let's remind us of what we're called to do. And the natural of that is Sean coming in and saying, how does that look like in the way in which we do ministry? And so that's the way to look at it, that now we're taking what Curry had preached and trying to turn it into systematic changes. So there's already been a reorganizing of staff at the Episcopal Church offices. There have already been engagements about how we do work in our disciplinary process. Our disciplinary Title IV process is another mess. And it's not that it needs to be redone. It's just been misused. Just because somebody didn't like the fact that a priest didn't do a birthday blessing shouldn't rise to the level of.
Don't give them any ideas, right?
I'm also well aware that my chants are right over here to my right. So part of it too is like, there was nothing in the system that could handle anything pastoral. And we've worked hard to try to be as pastoral as possible and not always go to discipline first. And so that's a big issue for this church, especially when bishops have had a record number of complaints against them. The joke among us bishops is like, if you can go each week and there's still not a complaint, okay. And I'm not exaggerating. It has been open season on bishops and the complaints. And you know what happens? That complaint gets received and our name gets published to the entire church that we're under investigation. It's not been resolved. No witnesses yet. Not everything has been processed, but our names are there on a website telling us that we're currently being investigated. We've had bishops resign because of that. I'll tell you, Laurel will tell you, there's been a couple times that I've said to her, I'm not going to do this much longer. I can't live in an environment where I feel that because I say something, someone's going to file a complaint and my name's plastered. And it's guilty until proven innocent. We as bishops who fight that system at least can control that when it comes to our clergy, we're not going to let that happen to my clergy. So my clergy, if there's a complaint or filed, nothing is made public. Nothing is shared. We actually do the work to find out what's going on before anything happens, if it has to happen. And those are conversations with senior wardens and other leaders. It's not for the entire diocese or the entire Episcopal Church to know that there's an issue. Only if people are at risk and it deems necessary that we have to for other reasons, right? So that's a big driving force. And this is not a disrespect to Michael Curry, under Michael Curry, there was an inordinate number of discipline cases open with months and months and months and months and months and months of no resolution. And clergy, bishops seeking mental health, resigning, because they're just living in an environment, because they're not allowed to talk, but yet everybody is judging. Wait, people judge in the church, you say? Yes. So that's a big driving issue. And so that Title IV discipline needs a whole nother look at how it's done. And you'll notice the website is gone. And Sean Rowe has cleared 26 cases that have been sitting there for years without a resolution. It is. And so I think now what's happening is Sean is saying, if we really love Jesus and follow Jesus's teaching, how do we make ourselves more nimble? How do we get resources to parishes and dioceses better and faster? How do we organize ourselves so that we're outwardly focused and not inwardly focused? How do we look at the disciplinary canons that really intend to be wholeness, to bring people accountable, but to bring wholeness, forgiveness, restoration, instead of punishment? And then General Convention, we have got to get our hands on it because General Convention is too large, too unwieldy. And we shouldn't have 700 and something resolutions. Jesus's work should not be by resolution. And there are certain things that we do that need resolutions, right? We have to make changes to our canons and to our policies. But do we really need a resolution to say that we're against violence in Gaza? Are we really going to argue for an hour and a half over language about what it should say about Gaza? And that's what drives me crazy. And I think Sean Rowe, it's the same way. And I think why you saw a unanimous first ballot vote is because many of the bishops are saying we are tired of a system that doesn't help us as bishops and dioceses and needs to really take a good look at itself and say, how do we actually do ministry in the larger world to be relevant? And I think that's essentially what excites us about Sean and why he's good at it. And he's already made some people very upset because he has bucked some of the traditions and some of the things. Because really, if you look at our Episcopal Church, a lot of our structure that's in place was really a structure developed in the 60s and 50s. Anyway, Scott,
I just like the way that he, theologically admits and is working toward that ministry happens in a diocese and in parish.
correct.
It doesn't come from an office in New York or
Correct.
wherever it may be located.
Correct.
And so to mobilize the resources of the larger community for the local community is what he's working on, which upsets a lot of people who work in an office in New York.
Correct.
But,
Correct.
but he's not letting that stop.
No, and I think the beauty of Sean too, and I mean, he's been very communicative with us. He called when he got elected, and then he was installed as presiding bishop in November of not 2024. He immediately called for a meeting of all bishops, and so we flew in December to Minneapolis with a high of 17 degrees. Cheap hotel. But immediately start the process of speaking with bishops to say, what are our priorities and what things we're going forward. So a lot of what you're seeing is from that initial conversation and a series of conversations and a response to what he's heard. And so one of the things that he's doing really, that his big focus in is like, which has been my focus since bishop is, it's the parishes, clergy, the lay people that need the help. It's not about us. I just told this story the other day, and if it offends, I'm sorry. I don't mean it to, but I was telling a story of somebody who wasn't in this diocese that when I first got here, I got pushback when I informed the staff at the time, which is not the staff now, that the phone would always be answered and would be answered by the third ring, and that calls get returned within 24 hours. You would have thought that I said I didn't believe in the virgin birth. It just tells you, and it's nothing against those people, but what it tells you is there was a mindset of this is where it happens. And it was like, no. And there were pictures hanging on the wall of a bunch of clergy from all the conventions. I took all those pictures down. We're not here to serve. And it was those photos of all the clergy at convention vested with the bishop. And they just littered the walls like a fraternity house. And I went, get rid of them. And I put up pictures of Camp and Camp Henry and children. And we're just about to finish because we had to remodel the church because we had sewage backup. Another story. Every church in this diocese, picture framed, and that's what's hanging on the walls, and pictures at camp and all that. The bishops are being moved to another floor, not the main area. Not that I disrespect my predecessors or me. That's not what it's about. But it sends a message when you walk into a diocesan office and you see pictures of kids and camp, you see our parishes. And my staff every day see our parishes on the wall to know that's who we're serving. It's not us. And that's essentially what Sean Rowe is doing at the larger level, to say it's not about 815 2nd Avenue in New York City. It's about the parishes doing the real work of ministry, and how do we help the bishops to get the resources necessary so the parishes that are doing this work can do it, and the community can get the resources. So personally, I'm excited. And I will say, and I will confess, and Laura will tell you, that I had said to her, depending on how this election goes, and if we didn't move in the right direction, I might start planning my retirement. And that's not an exaggeration, because there's only so much as a bishop I can do here, but if I can't get the larger shift and change, because I'm part of the larger council, after a while it gets far, right? And so now there's like this whole repurposing an excitement about ministry and how we can actually change the larger Episcopal Church, because right now, people need hope. Right now, people need to see that the church is actually doing what it says it's gonna do. And the church needs to be filling the gaps where others are not. That's what we do. And if we can make a system that gets that done and deploys resources and recognizes the real issues. I mean, the greatest thing is we spent 3 hours as bishops, finally, talking about Christian nationalism, finally. And so, you know how long it's been for me and others to get that conversation going? That's what it has to be about, right? And so, at the end of the day, it's not about me wearing this purple shirt. It's about the fact that I'm a person asked to serve and to provide and to encourage and to engage and challenge and provide hope and opportunity. Because my hope is when I'm long gone, I don't want accolades. I just want people afterwards to say, we have better relationships together and we're more committed to ministry than we were before. That's what I want. Nobody's going to ever remember what program I started or what I did. But they are going to say, we continue together to come together and do this ministry. We're better for it. And we know what we need to go and what we need to be about. Yes, sir.
I feel we do a good job at Trinity and in this diocese of sort of meeting communities where they are and being open and welcoming to outsiders. What I'm wondering about is, are things going on in other places in the church where somebody in like can learn from somebody in Asheville about community reach out? I mean, it's kind of a form of evangelism, but it's also fellowship, called so many things. When you look at the numbers of the Episcopal Church, maybe old models aren't working.
Right.
What is being done in other places with different ways of doing things? Like I think we do down here.
So I will tell you, that's what's really exciting about that is that one of the things I love, one of the good things about being bishop is that I'm in constant communication with other bishops. We're talking all the time. We're comparing notes. Or we'll call and say, somehow I've become the Title IV bishop, or other folks going through Title IV nightmares call me for advice. I don't know how that's stuck, but nonetheless, there's a lot of that goes on. And one of the things that we do intentionally as bishops, and Sean is doing, is saying, connecting. You might want to talk to the Diocese of Western Missouri about blah, 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 blah. They're engaging in such and such. We now have a regular weekly bulletin that goes to bishops that's kind of highlighting things that are going on. In the disaster recovery, I'll give you a perfect example. We have been referred to other dioceses, and they've reached out to us as they're talking about response to try to build an infrastructure as they think about now, let's get ahead of it and build something before it happens. So that's been going on for some time, and especially it's been ramping up over the last year and a half. So bishops are now getting, this is what's happening, and so often, sometimes I'll tell my clergy, you should call this parish and this other diocese. They're apparently doing this kind of work. This might be something that's going on. We certainly do it internally. And I know I've reached out to Scott sometimes and said, hey, could you call this church? You guys have done really well with this. But that's happening between bishops. And what Sean's trying to do is trying to develop a system where instead of just giving out the money, they're really looking at the valuation saying, how long have they been getting money? Has there been success? Maybe it's time for another partner, or do we have to change direction? And so part of what he wants to do with funding is saying, let's get it to places that are actually experimenting and having success with things. And let's make the money go there, and then let's tie others. So he's talked about regional gatherings. He's talked about regional bishop meetings. He's talked about essentially pulling back from having too many full bishops meetings and actually having meetings regionally or based on issues and like dioceses to address issues, whether it's evangelism or clergy shortages, or to really be strategic about how we're doing those conversations and how the resources are being deployed. So that's really exciting to see, and it continues to happen. It's happening with Iona, which you're part of. That, we got that grant to expand on lay. So that's the kind of thing that we're engaging in doing now, which I hope is only going to get better.
We have about time for another question or so.
Sir?
Peter.
Any thoughts about dismantling the provincial system?
Any thoughts about dismantling the
This is
provincial system?
inside conversation.
This is inside baseball. So we're all divided, the Episcopal Church dioceses are divided into provinces. There's 9. We're 4, province 4, which is the larger, which is considered basically the traditional southern diocese.
That's what I mean, Steve.
Let me tell you something. I could probably solve world peace faster than I could talk about this issue about provincial. There are people who think the provincial model is the best thing since, sliced bread. And there are others like me that say, right? And it just depends. Now in province 4, we're blessed because we have very active bishops. We do a monthly Zoom, the second Tuesday of every month at 8 o'clock. We compare notes, we share resources, we talk through things, and our lay people are very engaged with each other. And we as province 4 will do a lot of work together throughout the year. Some provinces, they hardly gather, they don't really know what their purpose is or why they're a province. And so it's a hit or miss. So in some ways, it's a very traditional thing that people just lean into and say, we've always had them. But in a few cases, they actually work pretty well. And every time someone suggests getting rid of it, it's heresy. Now with Sean Rowe, I don't know, he's got opinions about it. But Sean Rowe might relook and say,
I don't have any opinion about it. I just want to see if there's a non-inside baseball conversation. Question that anybody'd like to ask.
really play.
Really good one at the end. Yeah, Bill.
Yes.
What is the status of the church in Cuba?
Great news, finally, they've elected a bishop. Ironically, they had 3 candidates. One in particular I was really looking for, who I know personally, who's Cuban. Didn't get elected. They had 2 Cubans and a Puerto Rican, and the Puerto Rican got elected to be their bishop, which is fascinating. Growing up with a Cuban mother and born in Puerto Rico, there's always been a little tension between Cubans and Puerto Ricans over the years. But interesting. They've elected a new bishop. When we were at the House of Bishops in March, I had a long conversation with the provisional bishop who's been overseeing Cuba, who's actually the bishop of Puerto Rico, Rafael Morales, and we were able to kind of say, okay, now there's a plan going forward. I plan to be at the ordination consecration of the bishop of Cuba. I've been invited to be present for his ordination in Havana, so I'm planning to go. And we've already started communications now to how to revamp our relationship again. Financial situation there is dire, hunger, lack of medicine. If you read anything about Cuba, you'll know the dire straits. So we still have been sending money all along. We've never stopped sending resources to help them because they're in dire need. And we've done it through Puerto Rico. And the reality is I get money to Puerto Rico, or when I see them in person, I give them cash. My daughter, who works for a major bank, whose job is, she is an anti-money laundering analyst. I've assured her that what I'm doing is not money laundering, that in fact, it is legitimate and legal. But essentially we've gotten cash wherever we can in the meantime, as they've been in this sort of wait. But the conditions there are bad. Some of the clergy have been trying to leave and trying to get out any way they can, whether going to Central America or other places they have family. But I think this election has reinvigorated. It was a very large margin of win. People are very excited about him. He's a very dynamic and very engaged person. He's wonderful ideas. And so we've had initial conversations. And so the hope is that once he becomes ordained, that we'll be able to ratchet up our relationship again. And Scott's been a part of it. And maybe we can actually get some people there and start some dialogue about how we can kind of parse out our relationship going forward.
Well, friends, thank you. And thank you, Bishop Jose, for being with us today.
Thank you all.
Our next. Yeah, Bishop Jose will lead our next service where we have baptism and confirmation, renewal of baptismal vows for those who are renewing their faith, and thank you for being a part of that.
Thank you all.
So, thank you.